Hello there, and welcome to the Second Life Book Club. My name is Draxtor Dupre. Today's guest is Sergio de la Pava, a full time public defender in New York City, author of three books. Now, I own all of them, but I only read one, but I read that one twice. And Sergio will read from his latest book today. But since I read A Naked Singularity, just now I reread it, took a lot of notes, a very transformative book for me and many others. We will talk about those themes, which are the US justice system or injustice system, whatever you want to call it. The book is about a young public defender, overworked, possibly underpaid, defending the poorest of the poor uh, that are caught in this system. These are very often nonviolent drug offenders, and they have ridiculous charges of just from drinking a beer in the park or uh, petty theft. Sometimes they're entrapped by undercover police when they sell them methadone when they get out of a methadone clinic, and we see an incredible human suffering in the Naked Singularity in Sergio's book. We see also jaded, arrogant, and I'm using the term vindictive, although my wife says you would call a judge vindictive. And I said, well, in Sergio's book, some of these judges I feel are frankly emotionally somewhat disturbed, and they leave their anger out at the defendants. So uh, we'll talk about that. The main protagonist, Kazi, whose family came to the US from Colombia, is caught between ambition and burnout. And he learns about a drug deal worth some $30 million. And then he decides, with a fellow attorney, to commit the perfect crime. And that's when the known universe somehow starts to collapse, or maybe the universe already started collapsing. Anyway, Naked Singularity, one of our regulars at the Second Life Book Club earlier said this book has an awesome title. I think it has an amazing title, and that's actually the reason why I even stumbled upon this book. But we'll talk about that a little later. Now we're here in jail. We're not at the venue. Let's go through the singularity. Camera, please follow me, and we'll meet our audience, and we'll hopefully meet Sergio. Now here we are. These are several themes of the book. This is sort of supposed to maybe this is an office of the court CEO. He has his name is Bill Williams, and he has a lot of appreciation awards here on the wall. Of course, you got to display your your merits. Also, there's a lot of American flags here. There's a Uncle Sam dancing. There's a chimp um, dancing. These are sort of references to the book. If you haven't read it, maybe we will find out what that means. Here's a whole law library. Here you can get your face. Here you get your perp picture taken and your fingers um, scanned. Let's walk over here and let me just briefly show you. Oh, look, we have a full house here. This amazing audience. Here is a bunch of boxers in the gym, and Sergio did request um, having this venue be a jail, and might be an interesting experience for everybody to sit in jail while they're enjoying a book talk. Now, I have this high chair here, this um, lifeguard chair, and here is Sergio de la Pava embodied as an owl. Hello, Sergio. How are you?
I'm doing well, and thank you for the invitation. I'm pretty confident in declaring that this is unlike any other book event I've ever done. So,
Well, I actually learned the term hysterical realism. Um, I don't read any interviews. I just read the work, and then I want to get to know the artist behind the work through the work itself. But we have two wonderful researchers on our volunteer staff, and Shala told me about hysterical realism. I mean, you're the hysterical realist, right? You should anticipate that at some point you'll be an owl sitting in front of an assorted audience of tiny little people, a dancing chimp. You didn't see that coming when you started out.
that's a valid point. You're right. I have to be open. Well, I think in general it's good to be open to the new. So here I am.
Now, what is the briefly, what's the significance of the owl avatar? Or why did you
So so
choose an
so
owl? You went
so
to owl real quickly when I asked you.
this is kind of a an after effect of the pandemic. I
Ah,
don't think until the pandemic I really realized how much ambient noise there is. Right? It kind of internalizes itself into your mindscape and becomes something that you don't really notice anymore. When the pandemic hit here at its peak, just March 2020 or April 2020, um, all of a sudden I started hearing sounds of nature that I hadn't. I mean, many people had this experience. I'm not saying I'm unique to
right.
it, but I started hearing natural sounds that before that had been unknowingly to me, unwittingly drowned out. And one of the things I started experiencing for the first time was an owl that felt like it was almost directly outside my window, the window
Wow.
of my bedroom. So it was at a time of, obviously, as everybody knows, tremendous anxiety and the unknown, right? Not really knowing where this was headed. But I found the sound that this owl would make, like at 5 in the morning, and it would wake me up, oddly comforting. So I don't know
I
when you
asked if it was more comforting or if it was more anxiety inducing that I guess it could go either way. People could interpret this as, okay, here's nature waiting to take over until we're all done.
right. Right, so that was followed by a giant eagle's nest across from my house, and yeah,
Oh my God,
you
they're taking over.
depending on how you the relationship you have with the natural world, yeah, it's alternately stimulating and anxiety producing. But I drew comfort from it at the time, and
Mhm, mhm.
it's just a very unexpected something that may have been present the whole time and just never drew my attention. So I don't know that's where it came from anyway.
I think that's wonderful. That was one of the things, or still is to some extent, because the pandemic, is ongoing. That we're exposed to things that we, if we're open for them, that we experience them maybe more fully and or again more fully, as if we were children. I mean, I feel the very same way about nature. Now, we'll be talking about Naked Singularity, but you'll also be reading from Lost Empress, which I have right here. And here on the table, I just want the camera maybe to cam over there. On the table are a whole bunch of different things, including, of course, the Lost Empress book, Naked Singularity, in both editions from Chicago Press, and then the British publisher, and I can't pronounce their name, McLeho's maybe,
Yeah,
and
Michael Host Press.
McLeho's, yeah. Also, there are empanadas on the table. I hope you appreciate that, Sergio. There's also Ingwe Malmsteen's Rising Force, a wonderful album. There's their debut album. Faces of Death, the DVD. Naked Singularity, which I didn't know before 3 weeks ago that there was actually a movie made, which is very exciting. And the Yoo-Hoo drink. So, and a gavel. Sorry, I forgot the gavel. And two swords and a notepad. But anyway, now, um, the way, so I want to ask three quick questions right off the bat. The way you describe the U.S. justice system in Naked Singularity came out, I believe, 2008. The there is there's these cynical colleagues of your main protagonist, Kasi. Kasi's just in a couple of years, and the reader. I mean, at least I thought, like, he's not gonna last long in this job. He's very ambitious, but he's also disillusioned pretty quickly. You have this know-it-all character, colleague Conley, who constantly, says that, basically insinuates that he's all figured out. The reason why most defendants are of color, people of color, is because, well, black on black violence and all this kind of crap. Now, you in real life, um, are still doing this job 20 plus years later. So, the three quick questions: please explain in layman's terms what a public defender is. Question two: how have you dealt with burnout? Why are you still doing this when other people have not lasted half or a quarter of this time? And thirdly, in your book, a cabbie asks the protagonist, very early on. How can you represent people that you know are guilty? Your protagonist in the book answers practice. So these are three questions. Wrap them all in, or go where you will.
When we use the term public defender in the United States, we're referring to really something that um, very specialized kind of attorney, right? So in the U.S., if you're arrested and charged with a crime, cannot afford to pay a lawyer. Everybody's heard this on the TV shows, right? You have the right to have a lawyer appointed for you, meaning the government will, in some sense, pay for your attorney, and that attorney will then try to frustrate the government's ultimate goal of likely incarcerating you or at least punishing you in some way. So it's an odd system at first blush. But the public defenders in a big city like Manhattan, which is where the novel is set, people who represent 100 clients at a time.
That
So there's a
sounds
lot of
crazy.
lot of kind of triage, as we call it, legal representation, and that's the world in which the book is set. How am I a public defender? I mean, I still work at a public defender office. I'm the legal director there. I do tend to focus more on kind of large scale criminal justice reform efforts that my office engages in, but I also have clients still. And that's the key. The clients are the reason why I continue to do this work. The clients are fascinating people.
Mm,
Um, by and large, you get along famously with them. People who, in many cases, have made mistakes, yes, are factually probably guilty of what they're accused of, or at least some sense of it. But that's not really my focus. My focus is on the human interactions, which are like chess, like an infinite universe of possibilities that always keep me interested.
mm.
With respect to what you're discussing, with the cab driver asking how you can represent somebody who's guilty,
And
it's a
also the reason
question.
why I'm asking that is because my wife has been a research attorney for 20 years in Monterey. And people heard this before, and she actually told me she was interviewing for a public defender, and they asked her sort of a question about a rapist who was on trial, and there was like this little hole that she could go in and she could free him. And I don't know, she was maybe 20, 22, 23 at the time. uh, and she said, "Well, I wouldn't take that opportunity to win that case." And then, they said, "Well, then you can't work with us." But she
Yeah, I
said, "Like,
mean,
I can't defend this rapist. This rapist will get off."
well, I think that is, that kind of cuts to the heart of the issue, right? So, public defenders don't choose their clients, generally speaking. You're assigned them, and yeah, that's a common question that those of us judging whether somebody, is really suitable for the job. It's a common kind of filtering type question that we often engage in, because
Mm,
and when you say cynicism, I mean, yeah, listen, let's be frank about this. You quite often are, as a public defender, your goals, your only legitimate goal under our system is the best possible legal result for your client. That's
mm,
very often at odds with what is would classically be considered what's in the best interest of society at large.
mm,
So it's a
mm,
strange job. I think I hope I've made that part clear. It's a strange profession, strange way to kind of exist. Does can um, up is down, down is black is white, white is exactly. It's a mindset, and
I mean, I can tell you from my perspective, and also I'm speaking for my wife, because we had this conversation when you were coming on. We both have the highest respect for public defenders, and given the way the system is structured, what you guys do by and large, I mean, notwithstanding some of the people you describe in the book who are like, I don't know, they're taking it maybe as a like a little step in their career, right? They just go through it. I mean, this is what my wife said too when we talk about it. She said, the reason why some people become public defenders may be that they just want to see how do public defenders work, but they really do want to become prosecutors, right? So they want to see the other side and study them, and then they go to the other side to kind of beat them, I guess. Um, so I find people who are dedicated to this part of the quote unquote game. Uh, it's just really really amazing work. Oh wow, look at this owl. It's going up and down.
I assure you, if it's something I did, it was not intentional.
No, this is fantastic.
Okay.
The owl is playful. We're in a playful environment talking about very serious issues.
Ultimately, it comes down to whether you value, you know, to what level does a society value the civil rights of somebody who, by and large, is powerless, right?
Hmm.
So, and the public defender, the creation of public defenders, and I would say in the U.S. is really only about a little bit more than a half a century old.
Hmm.
Was at the moment certainly an indication that some kind of primacy was going to be given to these notions of fair play in our criminal justice system. Now, as with a great many human activities, right, the espoused ideals and principles can get lost a bit in the shuffle in terms of when you're talking about actual practice. And I think that somebody reading the novel would probably be continually struck by that fact.
Hmm. Do you no, actually let me oops, this is the wrong one. This is the big quote. I wanted to read this. I hope people can read this. This is a little bit small, so the camera could zoom in. What I really like about uh the novel, and again I read it twice. I mean it's an amazing book, and I'm looking forward to reading Lost Empress. Again, it was like a toin cost because I didn't have time to read both books for the preparation. But in Naked Singularity, there's a defendant very early on, and he gets convicted, and it's a very minor drug offense. And this is an amazing scene where he addresses the judge and the jury, and he gives this little speech, and he nails what's wrong with the war on drugs in relation to how justice is sort of doled out. I just want to read this excerpt here real quick. So this this defendant says the following. I'm pleading guilty, Your Honors, but I'm doing it because I think it would be a waste of money to have a trial over $5 worth of crack. What I really need is a drug program because I want to turn my life around, and the only reason I was doing what I was doing on the street was to support my habit. The habit has to be fed, Your Honors, as you know, and I believe in working for my money. I could be out there robbing people, but I'm not, and I've always worked even though I'm disabled. And not always at this, Your Honors. I used to be a mail carrier back in the day when I started using drugs, and that was all I wanted to do. So I'm taking this plea to save the city of New York and the taxpayers' money because I can't believe that the DA, who I can see is a very tall man, would take to trial a case involving $5 worth of crack, especially knowing how much a trial of that nature would cost. But I still think that I should get a chance to do a drug program because I've never been given that chance in any of my cases. And the money that will be spent keeping me in jail could be spent addressing my real problem, which is that I like no need to smoke. I need to smoke crack every day and every chance I get. If I have to point people to somebody who's selling the stuff so I can get $1 and eventually save up enough to buy a veil, then smoke it immediately and start saving up for my next one, then I will gladly do that, and so on. Now, Sergio, you just said that you're involved in working on reforms. I mean, this is so infuriating for me as a reader, how the money is wasted, but also people are kept in this loop. Um, can you give us an example of maybe something that um, how do you approach this reform effort? I know this is a very broad, big question, but what are some of the things that can be done um, from your office and your knowledge and your sort of standing within this system? Give us a
So
little hope.
the war on drugs in the U.S. is basically an invention of, Richard Nixon and Ronald Reagan. It just kind of warped everybody's values and took what was essentially a public health question, right? People becoming addicted to drugs, and turned it into a criminal one, and sought to solve the problem by just incarcerating as many people who as possible, and not really making any distinction between those who were like significantly profiting from the drug trade, if you want to call it that, and those who, as you just read, were in many ways victimized by it and by its use. There has been progress, I would say, recently certainly in New York, I think throughout the country and maybe throughout the world, of understanding that there's great nuance to this. That a war on drugs doesn't really make the greatest sense. That a lot of the vast sums of money that were used to execute that war, if you want to call it that, um, could perhaps be better spent towards the question of public health and drug treatment centers. My office, right now we're championing something in New York called Treatment Not Jails, which does exactly what the name suggests, creates more resources for people like the individual you just depicted to get into drug treatment programs, makes it easier to get into drug treatment programs as a consequence of the criminal prosecution, as opposed to just continuing this revolving door. When you talk about the US, you're talking about since this war on drugs, something like a 700% increase in its incarceration rate.
Mm,
So incarceration rate, in the early 70s, the U.S. had about 250,000 people who were incarcerated. That ended up growing to, in the millions. So while things, I believe, most recently have improved on these kind of rhetorical fronts, public minds, the changing of minds and hearts, I think there has been some improvement. We still have quite a ways to go.
but is the what with what but what is sort of the day-to-day stuff that you do? If you click on the highest branch, then you will be seated again on the branch. Um, you're down there, which is very
Yeah,
nice. I can
I'm a little afraid of heights, but I'll do it. Let's
the
see.
tree is too high.
That he was doing
Oh, look
those
how
he was
cute.
doing those Nadia Comaneci kind of revolutions around the branch, and
Yeah,
it
it was
was
not
it
it
was
was
it was scaring me like he was gonna fall off. Um, what does it
he's
look
very good.
like? It looks like, certainly at the time depicted in the novel, it looks like these kind of paramilitary teams of police officers hitting the street and pretending to be drug addicts and buying $5 vials of crack cocaine, as is referenced in that section you read, and then arresting everybody who was involved in any
Right.
way in the selling of that $5. That's what it looked like. And then it looked like that person going into court and, again, as was depicted in the section you read, it's eventually taking sentences to state prison.
Oh,
Uh,
no, no, no. I'm familiar with that. My question was more like, what do you do day to day? And I don't want to be too expansive, but I'm wondering what are sort of the nuts and bolts things that you can do. Talk with lawmakers. I mean, who do you address? Where can you put pressure that these reforms, like you were saying, more drug treatment versus incarceration, some of these efforts. I mean, I imagine that in New York City alone, probably it must be several groups who are working on this kind of stuff, and hopefully they collaborate. But I wonder, how do you sort of penetrate that system, especially now we're talking again about, like, oh, there's an increase in crime during COVID. Now it's all back to, I mean, it's very hard to find a politician who is not with the same tough on crime rhetoric right now.
no, that's exactly right. But I mean, what we do is we use our expertise to draft legislation, and then we try to get it passed. Or we have events in which we, try to bring to light some of the injustices of the system. We write articles, we write essays, we op-eds, all of the above. But you're absolutely right that at the moment, a lot of that stuff is falling on deaf ears, because of what you're referring to.
That is really frustrating. Shyla here asked a question. This is really interesting. Is the justice system racist or classist?
I
A
think
little
it's
bit of a.
I think it's both. Um, it's essentially, a lot of the things we're talking about are, and I think this is what the question is driving at, are a war on poverty, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And then what happens is racism makes it so that certain people are more likely to be impoverished, and racism also makes it so that those who are in power can ignore the problem.
Hmm.
in my view. It doesn't, the problem doesn't speak to them the way it would if the people who looked like them were the ones getting arrested all the time, were the ones being given heavy uh, prison sentences. So it's what allows it in many instances to persist. So,
And the judges are also, I don't know, the this is also I learned through osmosis with my wife that the mandatory minimum sentences, I mean, she was practicing in California, and that was a huge problem. The judges may be sympathetic, they have their heart in the right place. They can't do anything because these mandatory minimums are huge. Can you briefly explain what that means? I mean, we have an international audience here, and probably maybe I don't know what people do. Maybe they do watch Law and Order all day, but also newsflash: Law and Order is not the real world, right?
well, right. I mean, in terms of mandatory minimums, they absolutely are a problem when they're so high. In many instances, we have had some success, um, quite a bit of success in, for example, changing the sentencing structure in New York so that drug offenses still have some, depend on certain instances, still have mandatory minimum sentences, but we've succeeded in getting them reduced. But yeah, we continue our efforts towards having them removed altogether and making sentencing less of a, question of looking up a range of numbers in the book and more a question of a judge learning all they can about the situation and the individual before them before deciding what is an appropriate sentence. Remember, the vast majority of convictions in the American criminal punishment system are the result of a guilty plea, and
Hmm.
which point the judge decides what the sentence is if the parties haven't already agreed to it.
And that guilty plea is pushed on people with the pressure of, like, if you don't do it,
Correct.
you're an idiot, because
And
then
you're
it's
going to
going to
get a
be
lot more
worse.
time. You're going to get a lot
Hmm.
more time. Yeah.
Hmm. Okay, a couple comments here. Bergen says the rich are guilty too and get off on technicalities. The poor are entitled to play the game too. Um, I wanted to mention what I like about this scene also is because the way you construct it after this defendant talks about like how ridiculous the the war on drug is. The judge says, "Well, yeah, I agree with you. As a matter of fact, I have an article coming out in the New Yorker." And so, what you did there is just brilliant from a literary standpoint. I feel like I enjoy these things because you create a scene where the judge, again, I mean, the judge is sort of agreeing, but then he's plugging his New Yorker article. So in one strike here, you depict like you said, the complete disconnect between these worlds. So I'm sure the judge goes home and says, honey, I did something really good today, uh, but he is also removed from the consequences of what he does, meaning putting people in jail and making matters worse for these people for the
I
most
think it
part.
drives at. I saw a question pop up there on the screen about, the way I interpreted the question anyway was what role fiction has to play
Oh yeah.
in something
Do
like
you
this,
agree that
right?
fiction is a good way of changing the system? That's a good question. What role does fiction play or can play, or stories or whatever?
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure I can point and directly and say this is what fiction accomplishes or this is what fiction fails to accomplish given a situation like this. I do know that when I'm sitting down to write and I'm writing a novel and I'm not writing an op-ed or an essay, I'm most concerned with creating a certain aesthetic experience that expands what the reader thinks is possible or not possible. And I think the
Hmm.
reason I bring that up now is you mentioned, for example, in the excerpt you read, the judge kind of taking the opportunity to plug an article they've written, but then obviously doing nothing other than sticking to the rules of the system and imposing the prison
Mm.
sentence. There's the moment there where the defendant is talking and he takes time out to mention that the DA is very tall. Um,
Hmm.
just obviously, if you're writing nonfiction reportage or journalism or an essay, those things have no place in there. So to drive to the heart of the question of what role fiction plays, you have to spend some time thinking about um, details like that. The defendant taking time out to comment on the height of the prosecutor, the judge plugging their article I don't know if plugging is a term you guys use. It means promoting in a
Yes,
kind of
that's
brash
what I
way.
meant.
Okay.
Yes,
Um,
that was intended.
I always worry about these expressions and whether they're or not. They're kind of global. Anyway, so that would
You
drive at the
forgot
heart of the question.
half of my life I was exposed to the American way of life because I lived there, and now I'm living in close proximity to three Americans: my wife, my son, and my dog. But see, Sergio, this is great that you say that because what I couldn't agree more with what you said. I think that fiction drives at a deeper truth of these matters, and it creates a texture that even the best journalism cannot do. I mean, it's not an either or question, but to go deep into a world in a milieu and smell it in a novel. I mean, again, I'm biased. I just love big doorstopper novels, so whatever. People prefer articles. Good. It's not an either or is it? Um, but wait a minute. So plugging an article. Now, Sergio, you are like this judge. Now you are writing articles in Harper's Magazine. Um, I'm joking, but here's a quote. I put it up on the big board behind us. Here's a quote from a really important article, and maybe somebody can put that in the local chat also on YouTube. We have a lot of viewers on YouTube. The last here's you say in this article, last fiscal year the NYPD had a budget of 5.6 billion. This was more than the budgets of Montana, Delaware, or South Dakota, not their police departments, the entire state. The NYPD employs 36,000 police officers and about 19,000 other personnel. They have money to burn, and they burn it on the latest surveillance weaponry, which they disproportionately wield against communities of color. This is really interesting because, again, the book came out 2008 and it has these video vigilantes in there. This is so fascinating to read this now because now everybody has a cell phone camera. And back then the iPhone just came out and it's just sort of starting the ubiquity of the phone. And in your book, there is also a crime committed by two very young children, actually, and they're caught on camera, and so you play with those ideas. But since we have you here today, and you're talking about the budget, our American friends will know that the defund the police was a slogan, and still is, that is not liked by everybody on the left progressive spectrum, and it's being criticized as something that is unproductive. Do you have an opinion on the defund the police, the use of that slogan, defund the police, when when people who use that mean to strengthen other public services, social services, and so on and forth? And the critique, of course, is that that slogan um, will, can be weaponized by the other side by saying, hey, what, you want to get mugged, right? You want to do away with all police. I mean, what are you talking about? So, what's your opinion on this thing?
I don't think it will surprise your audience that as a writer, I think the choice of words matters. This is, I think, a good example of it. Um, if I say to you, I believe that the budget of the New York City Police Department is bloated and that more of that money could go, for example, some of that money could go to address the mental health crisis and the homelessness crisis that the city is currently experiencing. Um, I think that statement would probably be met with a lot of agreement. If
Mhm.
I said to you, I think we should abolish the police, I don't think there should be such a thing as police. I think that statement would, very few people would agree with it.
Mhm.
Um, so what I think, and it's kind of intellectually dishonest, but it's effective. Like a lot of intellectual dishonesty, it is effective. Um, they were able to cast it, meaning those opposed to the first thing I proposed, more money being given to social causes that would actually address the root of the problem. They were able to cast that as like a call to abolish the police. The word
Mhm.
defund is vague enough and not particularly, not exactly the sharpest word to use in that instance. And they were able to, as I said, through intellectual dishonesty, profit from that and make it sound like some people were calling for there no longer to be a police department.
Mhm.
Obviously, that's not what was meant by defund the police. the
Well, you're
first
not
thing I
only
think.
a writer, but you're also a lawyer. I just want to throw that in there because as a lawyer, you also need to choose your words
Oh, absolutely.
wisely, right?
Yeah, and I think that you just raised a really good example of where a little bit of sloppiness in that area,
Yep.
both and lawyers were involved. So people practicing law sloppily, people practicing advocacy potentially sloppily. You have to understand by now that 2022 America is not all that interested in nuance. I mean, this shouldn't be breaking news to you.
Yep.
It's about sound bites. It's about competing narratives and stuff. So yeah,
I agree. I would
hopefully a
agree.
lesson learned for those folks. Um, and ultimately, I'm also a believer that ultimately truth will out, and if you have the truth on your side, and in this case, the truth that greater incarceration isn't the solution to what
There's
ails
a
us,
lot of
that eventually
restorative.
that will win out.
Mhm. Oh, sorry, I was jumping on you. We have a tiny little lag. If you're just tuning in, this is the Second Life Book Club with Sergio de la Pava, our guest author of fantastic books that I can say, even though I haven't read Lost Empress, I haven't read Personae, and it's a real bummer that I have to do this show every week because now I have to read next week's guest and not Lost Empress. But I'll read it in the summer break. Um, Question from Nexus here. And also, let me remind folks and let me remind myself also that I'm looking at the clock here because Sergio will be reading from Los Empress. So we will not forget that. Naxos is asking, when did you first realize you wanted to be a writer, and how long does it take you to write a book? That's actually interesting. If you want to tackle that, I mean, your books are 600 plus pages, 600, 700 pages. They're quite big, except for Persona is a little shorter.
I mean, I think I first started identifying as a writer. I was probably 7 years old or in that neighborhood. By that I mean literally writing fiction, but not particularly good fiction. But
Hmm. And your mother
uh,
probably said, "Oh, you want to be a writer or a public defender? Well, do neither. Make some money."
yeah, that's I think that would be the general reaction. I had this stack of index cards that I would put a number at the upper right corner to indicate the page number. Then I would inevitably lose some of the index cards in which and lose the train of the plot. Um, 7 years old, so it wasn't the best record keeping system. With respect to, I forget the second part. I'm sorry.
How long does it take to write a
Oh,
book? I
yeah, it
mean,
takes
how long take?
years. It
Yeah.
takes years of, unfortunately, it can be a little frustrating. I'm not the quickest worker.
Hmm.
So, I mean, I think I would say Naked Singularity took about 5 years. Lost Empress, maybe a little less. Persona,
But I
which
mean,
is
I mean, this
considerably.
isn't it's interesting that you said that. One of my favorite American authors, Antoine Wilson, he was here and he wrote three books, and there's a big span between. And I asked him, do you feel this pressure when you compare yourself maybe to other people in your field with a much higher output? What kind of pressure does society put on it? I mean, I don't have to, spell it out that we live in this instant gratification environment where people are just consuming enormous amounts of content, a word that I hate with a passion. And oftentimes a book comes and then is dismissed, and there's like a tiny little marketing window. Um, is that something that frustrates you in the process, or maybe after the process when you get like this 8 weeks of attention or 4 weeks, and then people move on to the next thing?
Well, I'm in a bit of a unique position in the sense that I have this other pretty involved career going on
Yeah,
contemporaneously. So yeah, I mean, I don't spend a great deal of time kind of keeping up on the latest trends or worrying about it. I do envy those people who can work fast. If I could maintain the exact same kind of depth that pleases me and do it in a quicker fashion, believe me, I'd sign up right away. So I do feel
right.
envy. There's no question about that. But I mean, we all make decisions in life and choices about the things that matter to us. I take the writing of novels incredibly seriously, but I also take about three or four other things incredibly seriously. And you have to come at some point to grips with the fact that there are only so many hours in the day. I saw a question pop up about publisher deadlines. I mean, I think that's mainly in the US, that's mainly a creation of like mass media entertainment. There's no real deadlines with respect to fiction, with respect to novels, right? Maybe I'm sure there are writers who struggle with deadlines if they've signed a contract to write a nonfiction book on a particular topic. I'm sure that contract would have deadlines in it, but to the extent I've ever dealt with writing deadlines, it's with things like you just described, the article for Harper's, where you do kind of have a deadline, and you end up kind of falling in love with the deadline because it makes you,
Yep.
it forces you to say, it doesn't really matter what else is going on right now. I've got a week to crank out this, 5,000 words or whatever. And it's remarkable what a little motivation can do. So the two-part answer is no, there's no deadlines for my novels. B, I wish there were.
Because it focuses you too. But I think you said something also really interesting. If you have a day job, or even if you just have another passion that is sort of at the same level, that gives you some satisfaction and something sort of short term, then the long term stuff, you have more patience for the long time, for involved maximalist novels like you put out. I think that that is, if, and if any of you kids out there wants to pursue this kind of career, find something that gives you sort of these little spouts of satisfaction, and that keeps you like this, the little fuel, little power bars for the long haul. Um, Here's a question that's interesting. Again, I mean, so much stuff. Nichelle here says from Scandinavia. She says, "Isn't the U.S. jail system basically a corporate money-making scheme these days?" From Scandinavia, it's not looking like it's really intended to actually change the situation. I mean, we've heard a lot with along the lines of police violence too, that there are quotas in smaller communities where there is a loss of a tax base because of the no tax mantra over the decades, and they actually do make money with private jails, and because the inmates have to pay, and sometimes you can't get out because you still have to pay. What's your perspective on that kind of situation?
I mean, a friend of mine once said, in America, if the answer to your question isn't money, then you're just asking the wrong question.
Mm,
So yeah, there's certainly an element to that. What I think the American system is very, very skilled at is creating massive inequality.
mm,
And inequality means maybe a subset of poverty. And poverty is a great driver of crime, which then allows the whole cycle to kind of revolve and revolve. It's all of a piece. It would take days to kind of tease it all out, but your instinct, was it Norma? I'm sorry, Nora, is on the money in my
sure.
opinion. It's just
It's also an economic factor. I lived in rural California for a while in Salinas area, in South Monterey County. There are jails. There are entire cities that are completely dependent, where some most people are either uh, have a family member who is incarcerated and someone who works at the jail. So yeah.
yeah. I mean, there are whole towns here in New York, far away from the city, right? It's in the upstate parts where the whole economy is dependent on a prison that exists there and employs most of the people. Kind of I touch on this a lot more in Lost Empress, but kind of a grim activity if you think about it, to rely on for a living sustenance.
Well, but again, I mean, I'm going in circles. Your day job can also be pretty grim. Again, I mean, how I don't know. I'm not your shrink, but your character in your book, Kasi, who has like there's some traits, I guess, that he shares with you.
You're going to
Go.
in Cassie's line of work, you're going to be confronted with injustice. True, that's basically what we've been focusing on. Another
Hmm.
thing you're going to be confronted with is the darkness that humanity is capable of.
Hmm.
I think maybe that's what you're hinting at. So
Exactly. This is what right.
and
Uh,
that is a recurring thing, I think, in the novel.
mhm.
Um, you will be confronted if you choose to do this. If you choose to be
who did not entertain the idea that God did not exist. For him, there was no question that God exists. So he was racking his brain, like, why is there so much evil in the world if God exists? And he came up with the explanation that there could be a lot of worse scenarios. And so, I mean, that's why I'm asking you. I mean, is this a reasonable explanation to you? And then again, a related question: are you a person of faith that finds strength in faith somehow when you're dealing with, looking, I don't know, evil in the eye on all sides?
I don't find even though I'm responsible for that Leibniz um, line of thinking being in Naked Singularity. It isn't a Naked Singularity. Is that what you're saying? Because I know
Yes,
it's
it is.
okay, and it's also hinted at in Lost Empress, so it must be something that I'm discovering. Is I don't find it persuasive from a logical standpoint at all.
Yeah, I
I
find
also
the big
don't
fallacy is
find,
that he doesn't even entertain that God
but
does
I
not exist.
but I
Mhm,
don't find it illogical. I don't find the presence of evil in the world um, somehow counting as evidence that there is no God. Let's just use that word to kind of subsume a whole giant and varied host of beliefs about our reality, right? I mean,
mhm,
again, I don't know that we have the time to debate the nature of God and how you and I can mean completely different things when we say that. What I don't find Leibniz's argument compelling. I also don't find that these kind of theodicy arguments compelling either, that seem to say, well, look at what this group of human beings just did. Case closed, proven. There is no such thing as what you call God.
mhm,
So I don't
mhm,
find either persuasive.
mhm.
Um, and yeah, I think I'll just leave it at that. I mean,
Good, good.
I don't find either of those arguments persuasive. I find the topic endlessly fascinating.
Me too. And again, Naked Singularity, so much food for thought because the Kasi, the main character, what you seem to say, or what you tell the story with Kasi is that you, or I guess he believes in the book that you have to do some good. If you don't do good, that is in your power, you are responsible for the universe collapsing. That's kind of the message I got from Kasi, or that's what Kasi probably thinks at the very end of the book. I'm not
So
gonna give it away.
Dane says something to him like, why do you even kind of sit around debating the rightness or wrongness of what you do? You are like a driver in the Indianapolis 500 worrying about getting a parking ticket, a speeding ticket.
Hmm.
In other words, look around you. This would be Dane's argument, one of the characters in the book. Look around you to see what human beings are doing to each other, and then ask yourself, isn't it kind of silly for you to be kind of internally torn and debating constantly the rightness or wrongness of your actions? Um, and that's, I think, where Cassie says, well, if everybody took that attitude, then it would be even worse. And he goes, it can't get any worse than this. Again, not here to tell you I have these things figured out, because I don't. Um, but I do cop to a endless fascination with it. And Stranger Nightfire is absolutely right in that it's
Strangers saying, I
Voltaire.
believe Voltaire was satirizing in Candide.
And Voltaire is that proper credit is given in the book, I assure you, to Voltaire.
Hmm. It is. Yep. Yep.
But they-
I have it here in my notes. And you also mentioned Thomas Mann, and Kasi never read the Magic Mountain, and neither have I, but it's in my shelf. I read Lost Empress before Magic Mountain. Actually, the mother of my girlfriend gave me Magic Mountain, and she wrote it in the book. Anyway, I'm getting completely off a tangent here. This is so fascinating. Uh, One thing that I want to mention is the
well,
dynamic.
let's address Baragon Betz. Well, Voltaire
Okay,
satirized Leibniz,
okay.
and Voltaire
Let's educate the people. Yes, please.
depicted a character who had so taken to Leibniz's view that no matter what horrible thing befell him, he said, it's not a big deal. It's still the best of all possible worlds. So that's
Mhm.
kind of, um, in other words, Voltaire said, taken to its extreme, we would never be able to complain about anything because it's the best of all possible worlds, and it's God's will is another way of looking at it. And so his Candide um, took it to an extreme, and as we say, like all great satire, um, you know, made it larger than life. Let's say. this notion. Again, I don't have answers to this stuff, but I do find it great deal of fun. Even
That's
just
why
right
we
now
read.
discussing it. Yeah. Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's why
That
we
is
read
true.
and write, right? It's an intellectual jousting or boxing match. Interestingly enough, a lot of boxing in the book too. Okay, I'm not gonna get into the boxing thing because we're running out of time. What I love also in Naked Singularity is the dynamics between Kasi, who is again working full time as a young public defender with an enormous caseload, and his roommates or his housemates. They don't they share a building, a house that an uncle of one of the guys owns. There's three guys, and they're all enrolled at Columbia, but they don't do anything. So I mean, I've been in these situations where I had to work full time, and my roommates were just sort of rolling out of bed when I came back from an 8-hour workday and stuff like that. And the way you describe that is just totally hilarious. One guy studies psychology, and they watch television all day and they wax philosophically. To me, I'm not a big Joe Rogan fan at all. Actually, I find him completely nauseating. But it's some of these discussions felt to me like a Joe Rogan hour, like I don't know, stoners just sitting around and thinking they're completely like they're so super smart and have and then you come in and you're completely tired and they go like, Kasi, come in, drink a coffee. And they go like, dude, it's 3 in the morning. Yeah, that's why you need to drink a coffee. Let's discuss television. So yeah, really, really, really fun reading that. Do you miss those days, Sergio, now that
I
you're a
would say
married man?
I never felt as free as those three characters do, and maybe it's more envy again. I was always the guy who, like Cassie, who was working, and
Yeah, you're working, and then one of the guys is then switching from psychology major
yeah,
to physics, and then he
yeah,
drops out and goes to Florida and hanging out with the girls on the beach.
yeah. Maybe
Well,
envy. Who knows?
we all make our beds and then we sleep in it. What is a singularity, real quick? Can you define?
Yeah. So black hole. It comes from it's a term I first heard in undergrad, and it's a physics term. So it
I looked it
singularities
up
are
on Wikipedia. Sorry to interrupt. I put this up in the back. Shyla just put this together because on Wikipedia there's mathematical, gravitational, Van Hove, technological, isolated, movable, geometric, and now you introduce us to the naked singularity. I found this book. Did I say this already? Found in a used bookstore. The word singularity came to me, and I thought it's the technological singularity where man and machine become one.
no.
But
This is the gravitational one. Of the
okay.
ones you've identified, we're talking about the gravitational ones. Black holes are formed when the gravitational pull of a point becomes so powerful that it sucks in everything around it, including light, right? So that it becomes black. Is one way. I mean, of course, I'm being overly simplistic, but at the core of that would be a singularity. Naked refers to the fact that, at least as in the theoretical physics discussions contained in the book, they're talking about the bizarre, frankly bizarre space-time effects that would happen at singularity. Being naked, meaning being visible to um, to the human eye.
As it's
Um,
happening. Hmm.
right. So that's where, and also I think the phrase just sounded really cool to me back then,
Like I said, I mean,
which
I'm in
always
this
takes.
bookstore. The book was yelling out at me, and I had no idea about the history, about this sort of sensation of self-publishing and being picked up and stuff like that. Totally missed that whole thing. Had no reference to your name, but I was looking at the book. I was looking at the cover and was like, Singularity, damn, that's good. Naked, that's good. This cover, oh my God, boom. So, yes. Now, let's move over to or on to Lost Empress. And magically, a book stand is appearing out of nowhere because we're here in Second Life, and this is the singular this is the technological singularity where we become books. And now Sergio will read to us. Oh, and by the way, if I haven't addressed your question, please paste it again in the local chat. Same goes for YouTube. But we want to hear a little bit from Lost Empress. This is a book that came out in 2018. Um, Here in the back it says, it would take something huge to put this backwater on the map, but Nina Jill is determined to do just that. Do you want to give us a little blurb and set up the scene? Because I don't know what's going on in this book.
I'm just going to read chapter 50 from the book. That's all the setup you're going to get.
Will we
Uh,
enjoy it, although we don't know what's going on?
correct. Well, I can't say you'll enjoy it. I will say that the fact that I'm not giving any lead in will not affect your enjoyment or non enjoyment in any way.
Very good. And here's Sergio de la
And I
Pava reading
am
from Lost Empress. Yes?
the vast majority of human events leave no lasting record. A man fries an egg, a woman replaces a light bulb, a boy packs a snowball. The egg is consumed, the light resumes and is indistinguishable from before the brief interregnum. The snow melts. The only evidence these events even occurred resides in human memory, and in just a solitary one at that. And it's a limited residence, too. A memory must constantly crowd out individual memories, and ones like the above are the first to go. So a memory is no place for memories, but with something like the snowball, a memory of it is almost all that ever existed. And there's nowhere for that memory to go, and it has to go because it's not compelling enough. So then it becomes, in a very real sense, as if the snowball never existed. And a snowball never having existed is decidedly not a big deal. But what if ultimately the same can be said about a human being? Now, there are exceptions, and they can be instructive. For example, almost any time the police are called is a memorable event in the above sense of the word. More than that, in New York, every one of these calls is recorded in its entirety. What happens next depends principally on the substance of that call. Most of these calls are erased after 90 days, whereupon they join the fried egg or the snowball in the realm of entities that technically were, but good luck proving it. But not all go there, and this is true because of litigation and its supple demands. See, one of the most surefire ways to break through the senescent fog that cloaks almost all human activity is to transgress to the point of arrest. Arrest generally means a prosecution, which always means a prosecutor. And one of the things that a prosecutor will do is direct the NYPD's One Police Plaza to preserve the relevant 911 call past the 90-day death sentence, then, if necessary, send said recording to the District Attorney's Office of New York. Whether and to what extent this audio recording may later properly be a part of the evidence adduced at a trial is a legal question, hinging on factors like the hearsay rule and its many exceptions. What everyone can agree on is that it's all sorts of useful to have a written transcript of the call while doing things like debating its admissibility. Only problem is that creating these transcripts is thankless and surprisingly time consuming work. It's an unremarkable process, with one exception. Around this time in the Manhattan's office, there emerged a Danny intern without precedent, analog, or even scrutability. Excuse the two major preceding sentence vagaries around and emerged, but understand that in a supremely uptight place where every butterfly wing flap is chronicled and cataloged, no record appears to have been made of when or where Sylvester Scarpetti began, developed, performed, or ended his internship. Likewise, there is no data trail revealing who was responsible for bringing Scarpetti in, whom to credit, or alternatively blame. What is known is that at some point, Scarpetti joined the herd of uncredentialed 20 somethings that at all times can be seen in that office committing the offense of loitering for the purpose of experience. He was, of course, an unpaid intern, but he took it even a step further in that he appeared to have no other discernible reason for donating his labor. No educational entity was giving him credit. No fellowship or training program was being complied with. In fact, no unifying principles seemed to be in play at all. Scarpetti seemed to have negative interest in the prosecution of alleged criminals. Not to merely say that he did not want to one day be a prosecutor. It was more fundamental to that. He was simply wholly uninterested in the mechanics, rationales, or underlying drama of criminal prosecutions, or really the criminal justice system as a whole. He had, in short, no reason to be there. What he did have was a high degree of roundness. Sylvester Scarpetti was a round guy. This is not a new, clever expression you've been unaware of that expresses something about his personality, like saying so and so is square. No, this is straight geometry here. References being made to his actual body and the fact that it was astonishingly circular. He looked like a fucking cartoon bagel created to illustrate a dietary point. That's what he looked like. How he acted was even less pointed. He rarely spoke, and when he did, the resulting blandness quotient was through the roof. Nearly every syllable he uttered was designed to avoid offense. Nor was there any chance of what he said being misconstrued, since it was impossible for any of it to be construed in the first place. No truth value was assignable. It would be like asserting that the color yellow is true or false. And this indeterminacy so bled over into his entire personality that at times it seemed as if he were blurring the line between human and furniture. None of which would have been of any moment whatsoever, except that one time, through the accumulation of a series of minuscule imprecisions, a 911 tape was placed in his hand to the soundtrack of mumbled instructions starring the word transcript. Picture the first time Rod Carew swung a bat or Joni Mitchell sat at a piano. Because Sylvester Scarpelli listened to the call one time straight through, then sat at one of the community keyboards and typed down verbatim what he had heard. This all happened so fluidly and rapidly that when he went to the source assistant district attorney to return the compact disc, she initially incorrectly surmised that he was somehow refusing the assignment, and she prepared to unleash holy hell on this presumptuous fat turd. Only when he almost immediately handed her the beautifully fonted transcript did she begin to understand. Understood, but with a high degree of skepticism. After all, you can paint a house in an hour too if all you do is fling paint on it like that brain dead fraud Jackson Pollock. So distrustful of the speed involved was the ADA that she immediately handed it to a higher level intern with instructions to produce a transcript and without any disclosure that one had already been produced. 2 days later, she placed the two side by side, and it was just as expected. Major discrepancies. When she was done, that rotund twerp was going to wish he'd never been born. Well, he probably already wished that, but soon he'd be wishing it even more. Except that before she could unleash her campaign of targeted and merciless destruction, she inexplicably found herself listening to the actual recording. She may have done this in an effort to exacerbate her ire just before the big game, as it were. Instead, it was her shock that rose, because every single time the two transcripts disagreed, it was the fat guy's one that was right. More than that, the fat one was never wrong, period. And remember that this superior, objectively perfect one had been produced in about a half an hour, to the others, 2 days. This fact alone was freakily astonishing, but the truth is there was more to it than even that. The ADA sat in her office and struggled to make sense of it. The rapidity was one thing, but what about this other element? She crumpled and threw away the inferior transcript. Harvard Law must really be slipping. She listened to the recording again, then she read the transcript. Then she read it again. The events depicted in the call were grim, but that couldn't be it. They almost always were. It wasn't about the recording at all, it was about the transcript. What she realized, and she would never say this out loud in a million years, was that the transcript, while being a perfectly accurate depiction of the phone call, somehow also managed to achieve its own separate grandeur, one that went beyond the audio's undeniable reality. So, how was this possible? Did the answer have something to do with the little understood aspect of what we call reality? Was the fat intern revealing something, depicting it, discovering it, inventing it, all while maintaining complete fidelity to the facts? If so, what were the implications? Should she talk to someone about this? Is tonight that spin class Lori was talking about? Should she maybe even talk to him about it? Had she said she would meet her there? It was, and she had. She left and purposely didn't think about the transcript anymore. But you best believe the next time she needed a call transcribed, she was handing it to this Scarponi or something. And yes, she did have the same experience, minus the overwhelming shock of the new. And yes, she did respond by spreading the word, but only under the guise of this guy will get you a perfectly accurate transcript in record time. No mention of anything remotely metaphysical. Didn't matter because even the least perceptive person couldn't help but have a similar experience while reading a Scarpetti. His fame grew. Pretty soon it seemed he was getting all the 911 tapes. It made little sense to go anywhere else. A cardboard box with his name was set up in the corner. When that overflowed, he soon had a desk, then a nook, then a cubicle, and finally an actual office and an assistant. Even so, he had trouble keeping up. The quality threatened to suffer, only threatened. So much so that a weird process developed. albeit organically. A line would form outside his office as if to a nightclub. DAs holding compact discs. See, you couldn't just drop off the CD with the expected instructions. No, you had to convince Scarpetti to take on the project. And you did this by, in essence, pitching its desirability. Remember, this is an artist, and you're asking him to produce art. He needs to be treated as such. So it was not uncommon to see DAs on the line consulting notes on a flashcard or whispering to themselves in preparation right before entering. And it must be said that Scarpetti was not overly generous towards supplicants. He would listen, sure, but often his decision would be communicated so cryptically and never with any underlying reasoning that it wasn't always clear precisely what that decision was. It was absurd, actually, had anyone taken a step back to see clearly. But fact is, it was the only way to get a Scarpetti. So nobody took that step, and the situation persisted, and would have persisted indefinitely had not a change occurred in the transcript artist himself. The precipitating factor may have been a snippet of conversation Scarpetti overheard one morning on his way into the office. The gist was 150% of the conversation expressing mild surprise to the other 50 that Scarpetti was the author of the transcript at issue. The words nagged at him until he realized why at lunch. The realization. A great many 911 transcripts were made. He did not make all of them. It was apparently possible for an underinformed someone to believe he had authored a transcript he hadn't, or worse, mistakenly attribute some foreign work to him. From that moment forward, he decided he would sign all his transcripts. Didn't Monet sign? Manet, Matisse, Modigliani, Manet, all those M guys? Wait, did those dudes sign their work? He had no clue, but he would sign. No more intern 8311. Question was, what would the signature be? He started conservatively. In the lower right hand corner, in tiny script, a confident but almost respectable Sylvester Scarpetti. This was frankly justifiable. Couldn't it arise that someone might have a question about the transcript and want to contact its author? This would expedite that. That got boring, though. And the truth is, he had always wanted a moniker. So the above morphed into things like Sylvester the Scarp Scarpetti, or just the Scarp, or later the Scar, or even less defensively, scar tissue. Then there were those that had a mathematical bent, like S squared, S to the power of 2, and ultimately just S2. All this was tolerated, but not without the occasional raised eyebrow. Fact is, people put up with scar tissue's antics because the transcripts were that good, and no one wanted to be the party responsible for their cessation if S2 threw a fit and refused to produce anymore. And everyone understood intuitively that this was a possibility, because temperamental didn't do it justice whenever anyone dared comment on one of his transcripts, even if the comment seemed objectively laudatory. Same thing if you asked him when one might be ready, as the astonishingly speedy turnaround of the early transcripts was increasingly replaced by more deliberative exertion. Still, it was widely acknowledged that the work being produced was extraordinary, and that tends to dispel most all objections. But most all is not the same as all, and what critics of the Scarp there were tended to fall into three major groups. The first group just bluntly denied his greatness. To them, he was a glorified dictaphone. He listened to what people had said, and he reproduced it in written form. This was not a big deal. True, he did it faster and more accurately than most, and the resulting transcript was often compelling, but still he was nothing more than a tool. To the extent the work had any value, he was merely mimicking those who had come before, and he was a poor substitute at that. Most crucially, he was not responsible for the substance of his work. Whatever the relevant people had said was. Hell, given their unusual circumstances, these people themselves were barely responsible for it. Accounting for that truth, the claims being made on his behalf were wildly unwarranted. This, it must be said, was the majority opinion among his critics. The second group took an almost wistful position. According to this group, it was undeniable that Sly had produced great work in the form of those early transcripts. That work was superb and transcendent in the precisely the way people claimed. But that was the past. This is the present. Somewhere along the way, things turned. Likely, it was the praise done it. Whatever the cause, what was at the outset genuine, almost transgressively new, had now devolved into self parody and affectation. No likely about it. It was definitely the praise. because there was an undeniable exclusivity in those early days when only a select few were even aware of what the Scar was up to and how he was revolutionizing what had heretofore been a rather dull process. As that changed, as his exposure grew, well, at first it was exciting, but there was no denying that eventually, anyway, quite a bit of the thrill was lost, and the loss appeared to be a permanent one. Significantly, this group allowed the widespread popularity had less disrupted the creation of Sylvester Scarpetti's work than it had the reception of it. Either way, what mattered, and what both these two groups could damningly agree on, was that what Scarpetti was currently doing when he made a transcript was unworthy of notice and was easily replicable by any number of other interns. The third and last group's critique was simultaneously the most deferential and the most devastating. It could not be effectively countered. This group not only conceded that S squared was once great, but asserted unequivocally that he remained great, a supreme artist in control of his gift, who was sharing that gift right here in the present. More than that, they said, his work continues to grow in both richness and innovative execution. That said, their position boiled down to so what? So what that Scarpetti exhibited extreme artistry in his transcripts? That he seemed expert in human truth and impervious to cliche or shallow thought? Had everyone forgotten that we are in a DA's office? 911 transcripts are made for one highly utilitarian purpose only. Scarpetti transcripts serve that purpose no better than any others. He was a luxury, and worse, a luxury in a place where 3 or 4 law degrees routinely shared an office. For a long time, this objection just lay there inertly. There was nothing that could really be said against it in the sphere of logic, but the world has amply proved that this fear rarely controls. During this time, the ejection had roughly the status of Einstein's theory of relativity prior to Sir Arthur Lord Conan Eddington III or whatever's observation of that solar eclipse in 1919. You'll recall that when Eddington confirmed that light had indeed bent around the sun in precisely the way the theory would have predicted, theoretical physics exploded in intellectual delight at the realization that this theory, that had been around in some form for about 14 years, was actually verifiably true. And all this rocketed Einstein into superstardom. Similarly, though in the converse, a natural experiment would ultimately undo Scarpetti. What happened was a rush job materialized suddenly at a time when Scarpetti was out getting a massage. Everyone agreed that this was cataclysmic, but the massage was deep tissue in nature, so there was nothing to do but hand it to a hack who delivered the way only hacks can. What developed next is what proved revelatory. In brief, the case went to trial, the hack's transcript was used, and the defendant was convicted on all counts. More rare than you think. This was, of course, the empirical support some had been waiting for. Proof that the work of Sylvester Scarpetti was full of everything but significance. Some dissented that it was precisely that everything. For example, the beauty, narrative timing, psychological acuity, witty playfulness, that in and of itself most signified. But these protestations were largely uncredited. It was a bad blow. SS's popularity began to wane. One afternoon, the bureau chief, no less, was on the line outside Scarpetti's office, and the whole thing was taking too long for his liking. Suddenly, in what many would later retrospectively label the beginning of the end, he simply walked away and dropped his CD in the wire basket of an intern, whose name no one knew, though it was rumored he was a failed pop singer who stopped pop singing amid allegations of particularly egregious plagiarism. Also, didn't help matters when first a trickle, then a slew of inaccuracies began to come to light. Were these really faithful reproductions, or were they one demented man's projection of how things should have sounded? And who signs their work in that manner anyway? To Scarpetti himself, these infelicities, as he called them, mattered little. He'd been asked to do a job and he'd done it. At first, he'd merely done it very, very well. Then he demonstrated unprecedented brilliance and finally a level of artistry that was unlikely to ever be matched. Was it really his fault that the whole thing had eventually gotten away from him a little bit? No one understood the price he paid to create the work. No one spoke to him, and he spoke to no one outside of that work's context. Even when his mystique was most charged, when his presence in the room was enough to electrify it, it was that damn separateness above all. Still home to that one room, still that weak microwave, still that disheartening stillness. By contrast, the events on the tape were just so alive. That was the equality they most had, life. But not in any complimentary way, like when someone says, oh, so and so is just so full of life. This was life as it is, not some rhetorical device. Desperate and plaintive and defeated. Halting breath, the sounds that tears make independent of crying, screams that cycle continuously between anger and fear. At least those had the illusion of agency. Worse were the ones that were like bravura performances of denial, the ones where you could hear the voice clinging to the moments just before what precipitated the call, where the mind has not yet caught up to the words coming out of the mouth. Hearing those was hard. Hearing all of them was hollowing, and realizing that all he did was listen to them 12 hours a day, every day. So it happened. He began to serve a different kind of truth than the strict one favored by DAs and the like. How significant is it what precise words an 8-year-old boy uses to announce to the world that his mother has had her neck flayed open? Seems that what matters, the underlying lesson, is that this is what human beings do to each other. Not some human beings, not sometimes. This is what humans are. His art needed to reflect that. It needed to expand or contract like a diaphragm to breathe in the full panoply of life, but mostly things like the open throat. In these situations, it was best to abide no interference with respect to so much as a comma. No one else agreed. The line outside his office grew shorter, the people on it the less plugged in types. The praise softened, then disappeared altogether. His assistant was reassigned when she showed a talent for labeling rape kits. But instead of her moving elsewhere, he was asked to vacate their office so she could have more room to work. Truth is, with the dwindling number of tapes, he no longer even needed a desk, and so this wire basket would do. No one called him anything but Scarpetti, and those 3 syllables often dripped with contempt. Eventually, nobody called him anything. He reminded himself that he engaged in his art solely to satisfy something within himself, and therefore the opinions of others were irrelevant. He was wrong in one crucial respect, because while other people's literary judgment may not have been of great concern to him, it was other people who either gave or didn't give him 911 tapes, and eventually no one was giving him tapes. Without the tapes, there was no art to attempt, nothing for him to do. He had no direct access to them. He tried FOIL and FOIA requests, but all he got in return was the classic runaround. He gave up. He'd stare at the empty wire basket and invent inventory he could transcribe. But invention was never his thing. He had a different, very precise skill, and no others. Being that he had nothing else to offer, he did nothing. He was still an intern, but now he was testing the limits of what that means, what the implications were. He would observe strict business hours. No one could ever claim he came late or left early. It was what transpired in between those two events that lacked sense. By then, he had no workstation, so what he did was just kind of walk around, ostensibly looking for an assignment, but in reality, just walking. No one talked to him, so there was never any reason to stop or even slow. The Manhattan DA's office is spread out over several floors and even 2 separate buildings. In other words, quite a bit of square footage for someone to operate in. He began to log some serious mileage. He knew this because he downloaded an app that told him precisely how much at the end of every otherwise wildly uneventful day. He quickened his pace. Every day's number had to be bigger than the day before. He started to lose weight. He worked through his lunch break, and even went home, he couldn't eat for fear that it would slow him down the next day. He looked sick. People complained. Apparently, there was this new skinny intern. No one knew his name, who was always practically sprinting through the office as if he were terribly late. Nobody's coffee was safe. It was a safety hazard, is what it was. One day, and earlier than normal, Sylvester Scarpetti was stopped on his way into the office by a security guard who didn't recognize him. At length, he dug out his secure pass and handed it over. The ensuing delay was odd, but he was sure it would soon be resolved favorably and he could commence his walking. The time lost could probably be compensated for by a minimal increase in pace. It never happened because the security guard appeared to receive some heated instructions via phone before pulling out comically large scissors he for some reason had ready access to and cutting said pass into multiple strips. It was over. No one can definitively state where Scarpetti went from there. Some say he invented the circular beach towel that doesn't have to be rotated by sunbathers trying to match the sun. Others that he developed an app that diagnoses skin cancer, and still others that he did both, and that the lucrative symbiosis of these products made him robber baron wealthy, so that he now lives on his own private island, where every phone call between residents is recorded and later transcribed. An alternate path has him being evicted from several homeless shelters for insufficient net worth, culminating in his arrest for raiding the One Police Plaza evidence room. Then, when at a press conference, the mayor, who had been misbriefed and thought he was talking about somebody else, repeatedly called him alternately a terribly terrifying terrorist or a terrifyingly terrible terrorist, receiving several concurrent, at least life sentences in some newly formed country's vilest prison, where he currently sits waiting to meet his lawyer. Far more likely true is the rumor that he changed his name to Milton McGillicuddy and found gainful employment with a premier closed captioning company. Those in this camp, while conceding the absence of hard proof, point to the unique yet strangely familiar trajectory of the McGillicuddy career. The particulars aren't important. Just know that around this time, a peculiar phenomenon arose, although you had to be paying close attention. A new TV show would premiere. Critics would declare it terrible, and do so with near unanimity. Not just terrible the way every television show is necessarily terrible, terrible even within that framework. The show would quickly be canceled with nary an objection. Well, except for internet message boards devoted to hearing impaired television viewers. There, a different kind of unanimity took hold. How could such network have canceled a show of such unmitigated brilliance? Fine, the actors were nothing special. It was photographed as if underwater. The ratings were putrid. But my God, the writing.
And Sergio de la Pava reading from Lost Empress. Thank you. This is just, oh my God, this is really, really such superb writing. And like I said, I mean, bummer. I'm gonna cancel my own show so that I can read this book instead of the that I'm not trying to diss our future guests. Um, Amazing. Now we only have a few minutes left in the show, so very, very briefly, I'm bringing up this article here, this headline from a Guardian article, 10 years anniversary of Naked Singularity, where he said, "My book is not perfect, but it's what I set out to do. I wanted to have a propulsive, angry core." So, Sergio, you are, I guess, a perfectionist here. My book is not perfect. Come on. Uh, I want to actually ask you, how is it with such a huge success, the pressure of writing? I know this is your third book, but what is uh, the pressure that you feel you put yourself under, or maybe there is none. Maybe there's like, you know what, I'm just going to write this one. I feel good about it. If it has the same impact as Naked Singularity, who cares?
It can never really be about some kind of anticipated impact because that's just setting yourself for massive disappointment.
I mean, it's like the
Um,
second album problem. I mean, I've never spoken to Ingwe Malmsteen about it, but we both agree that his first album is the best one. Or maybe we don't, Sergio. When we drink a couple of beers, we might disagree. But you see what I'm saying? Like this is something that may or may not be something that hinders the true creative flow, letting it flow
I,
freely.
I think everything you're saying can, in general, be true. I'm very fortunate to be in a kind of unique situation where, um, again, I have these two separate but worlds that inform themselves. And the truth is, when I'm in the act of writing, um, I'm not really thinking about and what's going to happen next. I'm trying
Hmm.
to please myself in the moment. I'm trying to create a certain, as I said earlier, a certain aesthetic universe to operate within, and if that's working, then I'm fully satisfied. If it isn't, I'm not satisfied, and nothing that happens after the fact can change that, if that makes any
Hmm.
sense. You
Absolutely.
hinted earlier, I published, when you say Naked Singularity was published in 2008, I mean, it was self-published by my wife. So,
Hmm.
and many years later, it was republished, and certain things happened that could be viewed as kind of success, I guess. Not my opinion of the book and the process of having written it changed not one bit from the time that I self-published it to the time that other things happened. So
Mm.
I would counsel anybody here who writes or who pursues any kind of artistic endeavor to please don't make it about a destination other than the completed product, right? That don't
Yes.
make it about what will happen after the product is complete.
Yep.
Make the destination, enjoy the process, live the process, and the destination is the completed product. It is not how the world reacts to it.
Sergio, thank you. This is my ulterior motive that I get our guests to say that and inspire people because this, what you're saying, I agree 100%. And if only I say it, this is a boring show. So we need guests to be my surrogates. Um, you're still married. This is amazing. Your wife was also your editor. You guys didn't kill each other over this
I think
process.
it's amazing we're still married, but all the credit goes to her. I think she's the one who is amazing.
This is what I was going to ask. I mean, she was then also the one, looking for something as mundane as maybe typos or just repetitiveness, or maybe recommend something to be expanded, something to be short. I mean, what an editor would normally do.
I
Yeah,
think that's right. Yes.
amazing. Um, okay, so we got to wrap it. I'm going to go very quickly through these movie stills because I did not know this, that Naked Singularity was turned into a movie. And I saw the trailer. And actually, people know this. I don't like films. I don't watch any films that are made from books that I enjoy because I feel they kind of destroy the book in my head. I think for a writer is very different. I think a writer can be much more detached and appreciate a different art form. But for me as a reader, the world that I have envisioned in my head is narrowed down to one vision, and this may be the best team in the world, best director in the world. I still have a hard time, but this trailer actually does look really good. What was your involvement in it? And do you like the outcome?
Aside from visiting the set a couple times, I had no real involvement, and it's significantly different.
Mm. I can imagine. I mean, the complexity of just like I mean, I could just live with reading basically the transcripts, the court transcripts. Um, okay, I'm not going to press it any further. You feel like somebody who sees this movie might seek out the book.
I think that what you have identified is the way I have always viewed it myself in terms of if I go through this process with you as a writer and you and I collaborate in this weird way, and you might have died 100 years ago, and you and I collaborate in this weird way to create this imaginative space in my mind. I'm not all too eager to then have some other people interpose their view into mine. So I know exactly what you're referring to.
I have made some enemies. I'm exaggerating a little bit in my American friends because the movie The Never Ending Story is for a certain generation a hugely important movie. I read The Never Ending Story as a child because Michael Ende is one of the greatest young adult authors that Germany has ever produced. He passed away in the mid 90s. And when you read this book, The Never Ending Story, the movie is really problematic. I mean, it's so reductive, and I know what they had to work with at the time and all. Anyways, but I have pointed out that the movie is garbage, and a lot of my friends were like, "What are you talking about? The Luck Dragon? Oh my God, never ending story, soundtrack and everything, and my whole childhood you're destroying." And they're like, guys, if you want your childhood back, you got to read the book, right? Anyways, Sergio, this is absolutely amazing. Thank you so much for coming, and everybody here in the audience. Thank you for coming. Big thank you to Kitten Duo on YouTube for supporting us. If you want to support this effort that we're doing here, please consider joining the YouTube channel. There are several memberships available, or just give us some Linden dollars. Oh my God, we don't have a tip jar today because Ruby has forgot has Ruby actually has COVID, So she didn't put the tip jar here. If you are want to support this, just please teleport somewhere else. There's a bunch of tip jars in the on the other sets on this island. Um, yes, but super big thanks. Next week is Annelise Avery, a young adult author, fantasy from the UK. Her debut novel and another one are released simultaneously. Very excited about this. And where are my credit slides? I'm going to rush through the credit slides here real quick. The show is every Wednesday, 12 o'clock, Second Life time, which is Pacific time, slbookclub at Draxtor.com. If you have any recommendations, please send an email. We're booked until the end of the year, but I'm obsessed with it. The team is obsessed with it, and we're going to start booking 2023. Location manager, master builder, Ruby Geek. Show is produced by Isabel Cheren, Shala the Super Gecko, and myself. Avatars are made by Ruby, research by Shyla. Support, we get a lot of support from Second Life creators. Linden Lab gives us these islands. Don't forget to tip us, or not me, but the volunteer staff. Sergio's website is sergiodelapava.com. Any final words, Sergio?
Just thanks to everyone who attended. It was very fun and enlightening.
We didn't even address why Uncle Sam and the chimp is playing a role in Naked Singularity. But people have to
Next
read
time.
it and then email you and find out.
Exactly.
See you all next week. Thank you and goodbye.